Masechet Yevamot, Daf Mem Daled, we begin a new Mishnah. Arba'a achin nesu'in, arba'a nashim vametu. You have four brothers. There are more brothers, but four of at least six brothers are married to four women. The women are not sisters; they're not related. And these four out of the however many brothers there are, die, and they all die without children. And so now there are at least two brothers surviving that need to do yibum or chalitza, which with each of these four widows. If the oldest of the brothers wants to do yibum with all of them, and now he's going to have four wives, in addition perhaps to if he was already married, then he may do so. It's up to him. It's his choice. So we learn from here that one brother can do yibum with more than one widow, as long as they are not co-wives and not related. Okay, mi shehaya nasui lishte nashim vamet. Okay, now a simpler case. One man was married to two women, and he died. Some people read this clause by itself. Anyone married to two women will end up dying prematurely because of all the stress. Okay, but that's just a joke. If he dies, so now there are two co-wives who require yibum or chalitza. Biata or chalitza shelahat mehen poteret sarata. If one of the brothers does either yibum or chalitza with one of the co-wives, then the other co-wife can go free and marry anyone from the shuk. You do not perform yibum on both, or chalitza on both, or chalitza on one and yibum on the other, but rather you only need to do one thing with one of the wives, and the other wife is free. Third case, hayeta achat keshera v'achat pesula, im haya choles la pesula, v'im haya miyabem la keshera. In that case where a man has two wives and he dies, if one of them was kosher, could marry a kohen, and the other one was pesula, meaning she was a divorcee from a previous marriage, and now she is one of the co-wives. Well, then the yavam, he has a choice who to do chalitza with. If he's going to do chalitza, he may as well do chalitza on the one who was already prohibited to kehuna, because a chalutza also is prohibited to kehuna. And therefore, why should you take the one who was kasher? This woman, she now is a widow, but a widow can marry a kohen. Why take this woman who can marry a kohen and do chalitza, and now you're going to limit her choices? She won't be able to marry a kohen. No, don't do that. If she's the only wife and you have to. But in this case, because there is another wife who is already pesula l'keuna, you may as well do chalitza on her, and she will not be any more limited than she was before. And that way, the co-wife who was permitted to marry a kohen can continue, and she can marry a kohen. But if the yavam wants to do yibum, meyabem la keshera, then he can actually choose whoever he wants. This clause means he can even take the keshera, whoever he likes better, because this keshera will not be there's no problem. You're not causing her any harm, because now she's married, so she's married to this guy. If they like each other. And so he doesn't have to choose only the kishara or only the pesula. Alright, now the Gemara will analyze Arba'achin salkadatech. The Mishnah, if you just read it plain, it sounds like there are four brothers total, and all of them die. Well, if all of them die and there's no other brothers, then there is no yavam. So that can't be the case. Ela ema arba'a me'achin. It means four of the brothers, but there are two or three or four other brothers, and then we learn that if the oldest one wants to do yibum on all four of the widows, he can. Hadeshut biyado. Vishabki le. So the Mishnah just says that we allow him. If he wants to, he can do it. He can do yibum with four widows, and he'll have now four wives. Now the question is, should we let him? Right? Don't the rabbis the judges have an obligation to advise the yavam on what to do? And this would, good advice would say, don't do this. So how do we know that the judges are supposed to advise the yavam? V'hatanya, v'kare'u lo ziknei iro. So we have a braita, it's a midrash halacha. It's going to quote the pasuk and analyze each section. Not all of them are relevant for us. So it says that the elders should call the yavam, the elders of the city, hen velo shluchan. That means they should go themselves. This is such an important matter that the court, the elders, should not send a messenger like they usually would. They should go to the guy's house themselves and say, listen, come, we got to take care of this matter. You have to decide, yibum, halitza, what are you going to do? V'diberu elav, and they should speak to him. Now, in the Peshat, to speak to him means try to convince him to do yibum, because that is the better option that helps her and helps uphold the legacy of the deceased. The Midrash says, "Melamed shemasi'in lo isa hogenet lo." Well, Midrash says not necessarily do they convince him to do yibum. They give him proper advice according to the situation. The elders look at all the factors. For example, Shemayahu yeled v'hi zekena. Let's say he was a young person. Doesn't mean he's a minor, right? But because a minor wouldn't do yibum or chalitza, he'd have to wait. But let's say he's very young and she is older. She was married to his older brother who died, and so she's much older than him. Or the other way around, hu zaken v'hi yalda, he is an old man and she is a young woman. Omrim lo, ma lecha etzel yalda, ma lecha etzel zekena. Then we bring him in and says, what are you going to do? You boom? You're going to do with you're old, you're going to have such a difference in age, you're going to marry this person who's young? Or if he's young, we say you're going to marry, do you boom with this older woman? Not appropriate. Kelach etzel shekemotcha. Go pick on someone your own size, meaning go and marry someone around your own age, and you'll have a happier marriage that way. And don't bring fights into your house, right? Different people at different ages have different tastes, and so they're not going to be compatible. The older ones want to go to the opera. The younger ones want to go to a football game. They're going to keep fighting. So rather marry someone your own age, and so they will advise him not to do that. Now, these are just examples, but the other example that would be appropriate here is if a person marries 4 women, well, it's likely that that's also going to bring ketata bebetecha. It's also going to bring strife within the home. Each one is going to be fighting and will cause personal tensions and also monetary tensions. Each one has to support 4 women. Each one's going to say, "Oh, look, she has more than me. She's taking more. It's not enough for me." So therefore, wouldn't we advise this guy? Don't do it. Why does the Mishnah say, "Hadashut biyado"? Yeah, go ahead and do yibum with 4 women. It's not a good idea. It would be bad advice. Well, the Mishnah might be talking about where the man is very wealthy, and it's no problem for him. It's possible for him to support these 4 wives, and then they won't come to fight. He can buy separate homes for each of them, and there won't be a problem. Okay. Well, if that's the case, if he's so wealthy, why limit it to 4? Why not give an example of there's 10 brothers, and he can do yibum with all 10? And the answer is Laisa Tova Kamash Malan Arba'in Tefela Kihechi de Nimteyeh Ona Behodesh. Mishnah is including good advice that even if someone is wealthy and can afford it, nevertheless 4 should be the maximum. 4, yes, but not anymore, not 5. Why? Because of conjugal rights. In general, for a scholar, Torah scholar, he should be with his wife at least once a week, Friday night, mitzvah night. Depending on what other jobs, if someone's a sailor or a camel driver, he's not home very often, so his onah is less. If someone is available more, then his onah responsibility is more. But in average, we're talking about Torah scholar is once a week. So if he has 4 wives, then at least he can be with each one at least once a month. That's the absolute minimum. Really for a regular wife, it would be once a week, but it might be less for a Yevamot, because after all, the guy didn't want to marry her. It just fell to him, and he's doing this mitzvah. But nevertheless, even for that, 4 would be the maximum, so that on average, he would for sure be able to visit each one once a month if he just does the minimum once a week. So therefore, that is the minimum, even if he's wealthy. Okay, good. Mi shehaya nasui. Someone who was married to 2 women and dies childless, the Mishnah said, you do yibum or chalitza with only one of the co-wives, and the other co-wife goes free. So now we're going to question this. Unya bem letarvaihu. Why not do yibum with both and take both? Right? That was, the first case of the Mishnah is when he took all four, but they weren't related. They weren't co-wives. They were married to different brothers. But how about here? Why not do yibum with both? Who said it's not allowed? Amar Rabbi Chiya, Amar bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Kera, Asher lo yivne et bet achiv, Bait echad hu boneh ve'en boneh shnei batim. The reason is because the pasuk, when it's describing the chalutza, the choletz, so the chalutza says, as to shame the person, the man who's doing chalitza, says kacha yaseh la'ish asher lo yivneh et bet achiv. Right, this is the shame that will come upon a man who does not build the house of his brother. So the word house is in singular, bet achiv. So we learn from here, even though this is talking about the case of chalitza, we learn a law about yibum, that in the positive case, where he does yibum, the mitzvah is to build one house for his deceased brother, meaning marry one of his wives and not more. It doesn't say bate achiv. So one is allowed to do yibum with one wife, and that's it. You fulfilled your obligation, and the other one is going to be prohibited. Okay, so that's why you can't do yibum with both. Venachalos de tarvaihu. How about do halisa with both of them? Right? Who said you can't do halisa more than once? Maybe you have to do halisa with each of them. Amar morzutra bar tuviya. Amar kera bet halus hana'al. Bait echadu choles ve'en choles shete batim. So this we learn from the continuation here, that he will be called, the man who does chalitza will be called the house of the unsandaled one. Bet halus hana'al. Now in the simple reading, the bait here is referring to the yavam, his house, right? His family. He will always be known as, oh, that's the guy that did chalitza and didn't take care of his sister-in-law, didn't take care of his brother. Nevertheless, the Midrash is reading this as referring to the woman, Bet Chalusa Na'al, her house, and therefore, reading it that way, it's also in singular, and it says one, Bait Echadu Choles, you can do chalitza and separate from one home, meaning one wife, and not two. So once you do chalitza with one wife, no need to do a chalisa with the other. There would be no harm to it. There's no sin in doing chalisa ceremony, but there's no need. The other can just go and remarry anyone she wants. Okay, now next question. Unyabem lechada v'nachlos lechada. What about? Now I know you can't do yibum with both or chalitza with both. But how about if he does yibum with one and then does chalitza with the other? Would that be permitted? Would that be necessary? Amar kera im lo yachpos hachafes yabem kol haoled liyibum ola lahalisa v'kol she'en ola liyibum en ola lahalisa. So this is midrash we've seen already, and says a lot of the cases here that are things that we already know. This would have been a better opening sugya, but the Gemara does not go in logical order. So here is the basis of a lot of the laws that we have already been assuming. Okay, so it says if he does not want to do yibum, then he does chalitza. We learn a general rule from this, that anyone who can do yibum then can do chalitza. But if there's no possibility of yibum, then you also do not do chalitza. And in this case, if he did yibum to one co-wife, then that's it. He can't do yibum to the second one. We just learned that. Since he can't do yibum with the second one, he also cannot do chalitza with the second one. He also doesn't need to, because he already took care of one of the women. Alright, so that's how we learn that you should not do one and not the other. And furthermore, besides the pasuk, we have another problem with that case. Ve'od shelo yemeru bait miksato banui umiksato halutz. We don't want people to say, oh, this home, the deceased brother's home, is half built and half separated. That doesn't look quite right? It would be something wrong with this, that he only did some kind of halfway job. Make up your mind. Are you building it or not building it? All right, so now regarding the second one, we say v'yomru. So let people say that. I mean, what's wrong with that? So he took one wife as a Yevamah, not the other. Right? What would be the problem there? So we answer, you're right. If he did Yibum first and then Chalisa, you're right, then that really wouldn't be a problem, and people can say that, and there's nothing wrong with it. Right? He did Yibum. The Chalitza that he does after was not necessary, but there's no harm done in doing that in that chalitza. I mean, except that people might think she can't marry a kohen, and really she can. But otherwise, there's no more serious problem. So the real problem with this is that if he switches the order, and it's easy to confuse them, if he does chalitza with one first, and then he does yibum, this is a problem, because it says lo yivneh. Once you do chalitza with one, then the other is supposed to go free, and there's no possibility of yibum. You're not allowed to do yibum with the other. And if he does do yibum, then that is erva, right? And those that would be a major problem of a prohibited relation. And then that's what people will talk about and say, oh, look at this, he did chalitza to one, he did yibum with the other, and there was no mitzvah of yibum. Therefore, it's a prohibition of eshet ach. And then they will say that. So that's the second reason why it's a problem, right? That's the other way around is even worse. Okay, anyway, so we have all the situations of not doing yibum, no chalisa, no yibum chalisa, or chalisa yibum. All those are not necessary, and in most of the cases also prohibited if the yibum is second. Okay, now ve'ema ki ika hada titkayem misvat yibum, ki ika tarte lo titkayem misvat yibum. Now we have another possibility. Maybe, or at least the Pisukim that are saying, you'd only do only one house. Maybe that means that when there is one wife, then there is a mitzvah of yibum to do with one wife. But if a person has two wives, then you cannot do mitzvah yibum, because it says only one house, and this guy has two wives, two houses, and then don't do yibum at all. We might think that. No, that can't be. If so, remember all the way back on Daf Gimel Amud Bet, we learned about the case where Reuven's daughter is married to her uncle, to Shimon, and he dies without children, and so this he would not do yibum at all, not on his daughter and not on the co-wife if he had another wife. And we learned that from a pasuk. We learned from pasuk of V'isha lachota lo tikach, that you can't marry two sisters, lisror, and that applies even in the yibum case from the gezerah shava. So why would the pasuk have to tell us that if, according to what you just proposed, anytime there are two wives, there's no yibum, then you don't need me to tell me a pasuk that if one of the wives is also related to the yavam, then there's no yibum. There's no yibum in any case when there's two wives. So this can't be true. So we answer, Hashta tarte be'alma amarat la b'nei chalisa v'yibum ninhu sarat erva miba'ya. This is all part of the question. Right now, if you're telling me based on this only one house derivation that two women in general, in any case, do not do chalitza and yibum, then why would you need to give me a pasuk that tells me about a case where one of the co-wives is related, that the other co-wife who was not related also has no yibum or chalitza? I wouldn't need to tell me this pasuk regarding the sisters back in Daf Gimel. Okay, so that's a good question, but we answer it. Alama lo isterich sakadatech mina erva abarai kayama v'tityabem sarata kamash malan de asira. No, I would still need it, because I might think that when one of the co-wives is related, then she is outside, because a man, for example, if it was his daughter, since a man and his daughter, there's no zikah, there's no possibility, the obligation never arises, she stands outside the whole situation. Just leave her out of it. And then, in that case, I might actually think that it would be permitted to perform Yibum with the other co-wife. That is in fact Bet Shammai's opinion, that it's permitted and required. And so over there, I do need that derivation from the case of sisters. Whereas, if there are two women, two co-wives who are not related to the Yavam at all, then I might think then I might not know this case. So that's why I need both derivations. I need you to tell me that, in the case of regular two co-wives who are not related, we know Yibum and Chalitza, that's what we're going to learn here. And I would still need the other one to teach me that even if when one is related, I might think there that is actually a greater obligation to take the other one. No, even there's no Yibum Chalisa. So that question we take off the table. So rather now we're back to the original question, looking for a source for the idea that when there are two co-wives, you still have to do Yibum. And we don't say, you only do Yibum in one, when there's one home and not two homes. So we learn it, Ela Yevimto Riba. The Pasuk says the word Yevama twice here. Nigesha Yevimto, Fanav, Kayase Shasoy et Bet Achiv. Here, right, and so it says Yevamah twice, and from there we learn that even if there are two Yevamot that both have a zikah, nevertheless they do require something. One of them requires Yibum or Chalitza. All right, and last point here, Hayata Achat Keshera. When a man is married to two wives and one was already prohibited to a kohen, she had already been a divorcee, and one is kasher, then if the yavam is going to do chalitza, he should do chalitza with the one who was already pesula, so as not to further limit the marriage options of the wife who is keshera. Amar Rav Yosef, kan shana Rabbi, lo yishpoch adam me boro ve'acherim tzrichim lahem. Rabbi said about this case, he gave an analogy that a person should not spill out his own water from his pit, even though it's his water. He drew it from his own pit, but he doesn't need it, so he shouldn't spill it out when others do need it. Don't waste. Rather, if you don't want it, then allow someone else to have it. And the analogy, same thing as here. Even if you don't want to do Yibum with either one of them and you want to do Chalitza, don't ruin the chances for another Kohen, for someone else who is a Kohen, to marry her by doing Chalitza with the Keshera, right? You don't want to marry her, but there might be a Kohen out there who does, and therefore, if you can, try to save her and do Chalitza on the one who was already Pesula. All right, very good. Next Mishnah. Hamachazir gerushato, v'hanose chalusato, v'hanose kerobat chalusato, Yosi v'havlat mamzer, divrei Rabbi Akiva. We already encountered the stringent opinion of Rabbi Akiva regarding mamzerut, but here is the source for it. Someone who takes back the woman who he divorced, assuming, doesn't say here, but assuming that she got married in the middle. A man's married to a woman, they get divorced, she goes and marries someone else, gets divorced from him, or he dies, and then she comes back to her first husband. That is prohibited. And if they have a child, according to Rabbi Akiva, a mamzer. Now this is actually only an isur lav, not an isur karet, and so this is only according to Rabbi Akiva, says this is a mamzer. Second case is hanoseh chalusato, if one does chalitza and then decides to marry her. This is prohibited, right? You had your chance. You have to if you want to do yibum, you have to do it right away. Once you do chalitza, then that's it. She's no longer permitted to you. It goes back to being like an eshet ach. Although, and not a karet, because once she was available to yibum, so she's no longer eshet ach. But if you do chalitza, now chalutza is prohibited as a lav. and therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, even in Isur Lav, a child produces a mamzer. And the third case is someone who marries the close relative of the chalutza. He does chalitza on a woman, and then he wants to marry her sister or mother or daughter. So all these cases, in all these cases, they must separate, divorce, and the child is a mamzer. The third case is surprising because until now we've been assuming that kerobat halusato is only midde rabbanan. The Gemara will ask about it. And so nevertheless, Rabbi Akiva says mamzer in all of these cases. Chachamim, however, Chachamim omerim and havalad mamzer. No, Chachamim say no, valad, the child is okay, because Chachamim say that you only produce a mamzer with an isur karet. If it would be, one of the adayot, deoraita, those are isur karet, and that would produce a mamzer. But not in any of these cases. These are only isur lav. Umodim benose kerobat gerushato shavalad mamzer. However, they do agree, even Rabbanan agree, that if someone would take the relative of his own gerusha, so he was married to a woman and then divorces her. While they're married, he is prohibited to all of her relatives. That's the definition of the cases of adayot: her sister, her mother, and so on. Even after they get divorced, although he is not related to his wife anymore, he remains prohibited to all her close relatives forever. I mean, except for a sister if he dies. But the other close relatives are prohibited, and that would be an isur karet, and therefore the child is a mamzer in those cases. So we want to Chachamim distinguish between these three cases. It's isur karet, and this case here, that's these three cases are isur mamzer, and this case that's isur karet. The general rule is that according to the Rabbi Akiva, you produce a mamzer even with an isur lav. Hachamim, no, only with an isur karet. All right, so now we ask about this chalutzato. V'sabar Rabbi Akiva noseh kerobat chalutzato havalad mamzer. Does Rabbi Akiva really think that if one marries the relative of the chalutza, that would be a problem? That would be a mamzer. The chalutza herself is the isur lav, but the relative of the chalutza, what is the status of her? V'hamaresh lakish kan shana Rabbi achot gerusha midivre Torah, achot chalusa midivre sofrim. Rabbi said about this very situation that the sister of a gerusha, that is asur mideoraita, but the sister of a halusa is only midivre sofrim, which we understand to be just a drabanan, and so there shouldn't be any mamzerut from this case, even according to the Rabbi Akiva. So our answer is Taneh Kirubat Gerushato. You know what? We have to amend the Mishnah. We're doing a lot of emendations lately on Mishnayot. So instead of the third case being Noseh Kirubat Halutzato, read Kirubat Anoseh Kirovat Gerushato, meaning the same case as the Chachamim bring up here. And so now the Gemara is going to, so this solves that problem. And the Gemara is going to bring support from the parallelism here. Since it says Chachamim agree, Modim, so they should agree. It makes sense if they agree on a case that Rabbi Akiva also already spoke about, right? One of these cases, the Chachamim disagree on two cases, but they agree on one case. Noseh kirovat gerushato. So it really makes sense for the flow of the Mishnah to be exactly that. Hachaname mistaberat dekatani sefa umodim benoseh kirovat gerushato shavalad mamzer. Right? The sefa says that the Chachamim agree if someone marries the relative of his divorcee, then the child is a mamzer. If you think that Rabbi Akiva also was talking about that very case, then it makes sense that they would say, yeah, and they agree on that case. But if Rabbi Akiva was not talking about that case, if he was only talking about a case of kerovat halutzato, then why would you say, and they agree? No, Rabbi Akiva never spoke about that case, so you wouldn't say use the word, and they agree. All right, this seems to be a pretty good proof from the Sefa. We're going to challenge it and actually reject it, and reject this entire emendation and come to something else. So let's see the questioning. V'dilma hakamashmalan diyesh mamzer mechayave karetot. Hold on, maybe I need this clause to teach me that they agree, not about the specific case, which Rabbi Akiva did not speak about, but the agreement is that they agree that there is mamzerut if it's an isur karet, right? Don't think that Rabbi Akiva holds of a mamzerut from a lav, and Chachamim say no mamzerut. Well, never, right? No, we have to say they agree that there is mamzerut if it was chayav karet. So they bring a different case that is a chayav karet. So we could read the Mishnah. It does flow. Ha katani la lekaman. Hold on, you don't need this Mishnah to tell us that according to the majority opinion, there is a mamzer from someone who has prohibited relations. That's isur karet. We have that in a later Mishnah. This is the last Mishnah in our perek, the fourth perek of Yevamot, that says ezehu mamzer. Kol she'ar basar shehu belo yavo dibre Rabbi Akiva. So the Mishnah there says a close relative that is subject to lo yavo, a lav prohibition, will produce a mamzer according to Rabbi Akiva. So this we know already. Rabbi Shimon HaTimni omer kol shechayavin alav karet bidei shamayim vehalacha kemoto. Then we have another named opinion, Shimon HaTimni, the Yemenite from down south, and he says anyone who has isur karet, and if they have a child, then the child will be a mamzer. And even though that's only a minority opinion, the Mishnah continues and says the law is like him, indicating that that is the majority opinion. So we already know that according to Chachamim, an isur karet produces a mamzer. So I don't need our Mishnah to tell us that case. It doesn't have to bring in a new case just for that. So then we say, okay, fine, but the Mishnah can still flow without the emendation. Vedilma kasatem lan tana kedebi Shimon HaTimni. Maybe we wanted our Mishnah to give a stam, right? Our Mishnah has Rabbi Akiva and then anonymous. And maybe we wanted to have not only that Mishnah later on that has an individual opinion, but also a Mishnah that's stam that says, yes, isur karet produces a mamzer. And that's why we need this one also. Imken litne she'ar hayave karetot kerobat kirushato lamali. No, but if that's the case, you could have brought any example. There's lots of examples of isure karet. So why do you have to bring this particular example of kerobat kirushato? Ela shemamina ayriba. No, so by bringing this particular example, it does suggest that Rabbi Akiva also mentioned that example, and that's why it says modim. So the emendation is good. We support the emendation. And then, no, one last rejection. V'dilma le'olam lo ayriba. No, maybe really Rabbi Akiva did not talk about this case. Leave out the emendation. He was not talking about a case of kerovat gerushato. V'aydi de tana machzir gerushato v'noseh chalusato krubat chalusato tananame kerovat gerushato. Rabbi Akiva was not talking about that case. So why in the Sefer did they bring this case? Well, they wanted to show that in general, the Chachamim do agree that Isur Karet, at least, produces Mamzer, and they wanted to bring an example. So what example should they bring? A different example that's totally different? No, since you're already talking about similar examples, someone who takes back his own gerusha or chalutza, the relative of a chalutza. So we'll bring another example that's very similar to the three cases Rabbi Akiva spoke about, even though Rabbi Akiva did not actually speak about this specific case. So therefore, we reject the flow argument that supported this emendation, and we're going to go without the emendation at all. We're going to go back to the original wording of the Mishnah. Ela kerobat chalusato Rabbi Akiva have mamzer. And in fact, yes, kerobat chalusato, someone came, he did chalisa to a woman, and then he went ahead and married the chalusa's mother. And according to Chachamim, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he said that is divrei sofrim. But according to Rabbi Akiva, it's a biblical prohibition, it's a lav, and it produces a mamzer. An amazing thing. What's the source? Amar Rabbi Chiya bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hainu tamad Rabbi Akiva damar kera bet halus hana'al hakatuv kera'o beto. Oh, we does have a pasuk since the very last pasuk that we had there, where we already cited once. We're going to call him, anyone who does chalisa, we're going to call him bet halus hana'al. And once again, even though in the Peshat is talking about his home, we already saw Midrash that has this pasuk refer to her home, and she is called bet halus hana'al. She is, even though she is a halutza. So, but yet, even though it's her house that had the chalitza, nevertheless, it refers to her house in terms of him, and it calls it his home. And his home has chalitza in it because he did chalitza to this woman. Since it's called his home, that means that she, the chalutza, is part of his home. She had, when they had zikah, that was almost like they were like married, and therefore even after chalitza, it has the same law as if they were married and gerusha. So to here, it has the same law, and just like if they were married or divorced, he would be prohibited to her relatives mideoraita. So too, according to Rabbi Akiva, if he had a zikah and then did chalitza to her, then he remains prohibited to her relatives on a deoraita level. And this explains the simple reading of the Mishnah without any emendation, and that Rabbi Akiva prohibits the kirovat chalusato even mid-deoraita. The continuation of the Sugya deals with the status of a child of someone who is machazir gerushato. He divorces his wife, she goes with someone else, and then he takes her back. That's prohibited as a lav. What's the status of the child? We already saw from the Mishnah that according to Rabbi Akiva, the child will be a mamzer. According to Chachamim, not a mamzer. But what about if it's a girl? Can she marry a kohen? Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi, so the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. This following statement, therefore, is from a Tana, and it says, "Hakol modim b'machazir gerushato, shavalad pagum likuna." Everyone agrees that the child of this union of machazir gerushato will be prohibited to marry a kohen. If she's a girl, she cannot marry a kohen. Okay, so that's the statement. We're going to analyze it. The following analysis takes us till the end of the daf, and it has a beautiful chiastic structure as follows. We just said the statement that we read. We're going to bring a source for it from a kal vachomer. However, we're going to challenge the kal vachomer with three challenges. We will respond to the third challenge. We will also answer the second challenge, but we will not find the response to the first challenge. And therefore, since this kal vachomer is challenged, we say we cannot uphold that version of the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and therefore we amend it to a different statement, not about the child of a returned divorcee, but rather the child of a karet prohibition. That will be pagum. Okay, so let's see how this works. What is the kal vachomer proving it? First of all, man kakol modim, Shimon hatimni says everyone agrees. Well, what do you mean everyone agrees? It must be even Shimon hatimni. He represents Chachamim, who say that the child of a returned divorcee, assuming she got married in the middle, that is a lav, and therefore the child is not a mamzer. So he's saying, even though he is not a mamzer, but she cannot marry a kohen. He will agree with Rabbi Akiva, who is certainly even more stringent, and he says the child is even a mamzer. So for sure, can't marry anybody, for sure not a kohen. So that's who is agreeing with Rabbi Akiva here, Shimon hatimni. Daf agav de'amar Shimon hatimni en mamzer mechayav elavin nid mamzer lo have pagum mi'haveh. Right, even though it generally says that you do not isur lav does not produce a mamzer. Fine, not a mamzer, but still not good enough to marry a kohen. And how do we know this? Mikal vachomer me'almana u'ma'almana lekohen gadol she'en isura shaveh bakol benah pagum. Zo she'isura shaveh bakol enodin shebenah pagum. If our basis point is an almana who's prohibited to be with a kohen gadol. Now, this prohibition does not apply to everyone. It only applies to only kohen gadol cannot marry an almana. Everyone else in the world, kohanim and non-kohanim, can marry an almana. So if here, where the prohibition is not the same for everyone, and yet if an almana does marry a kohen gadol, the marriage is a valid marriage, and the child will be pagum. That child will not be able to marry a kohen. So, all the more so in this case, where this is a stronger prohibition in that someone who returns his widow after she married someone else and has this is a prohibition that applies to everyone. Right? No one is allowed, anyone who is in such a case, who has a wife who he divorced and she then married someone else, even if that second husband died or divorced, he is not allowed to take her back. So this is a more stringent prohibition. If he does take her back, all the more so, the child should be pagum. Okay, so this is the Kal Vachomer, and so far we have good foundation to support this statement of Rabbi, that even Shimon HaTimni will agree that the returned divorcee child is a pagum. However, we're going to challenge this Kal Vachomer in three ways. Number one, Ika lemifrach, mal almana sheken hi atzma mitchalelet. Hold on, you can't compare the cases because the almanah to a Kohen Gadol has itself a stringency in that when she's the almanah, before she marries the Kohen Gadol, she is permitted to be with any other kohen and anybody else, for any non-kohen for that matter. And once she marries the Kohen Gadol, now even if the Kohen Gadol dies, she is not allowed to marry any other kohen. She herself becomes a halala. That is not true with regard to the case of Machazir Girushato. That woman, the second he first divorces her the first time, she's already a divorcee and cannot marry any kohen. So when she goes and marries a second person and he dies, and then the first husband takes her back, that prohibition does not make her any more prohibited than she was before. So in that sense, we can undo the Kal Vachomer because the source that you're learning it from has a stringency that the law that we are deriving, regarding Machzir Gurushato, does not have that stringency. So that's challenge number one, and we're not going to answer this challenge. Challenge number two, Ve'od, hi to'e baketi ve'en baneha to'evin. Pasuk regarding returning a divorcee says, Lo yuchal bala rishona sheshelcha lashub lekachta. The first husband who sent her away, who divorced her, cannot take her back, liot lo liisha, to be his wife again, achareh sherhu tama'a, ki to'eva hi lifnei Adonai, because she became tameh by marrying the second guy. I mean, she could marry the second guy, that was not prohibited, but then she can't go, that makes her prohibited tameh to the first husband, and that is called a to'eva hi. She is a to'eva, and we specify, why is it saying extra word he? That she is a to'eva means only she now becomes prohibited to the husband, but there's no problem with the child. Only she is a to'eva, but the children are not to'evin. The children can marry anyone, even a kohen. So that is the second proof against the law of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Ve'od Tanya hamachazir girushato v'hanoseh chalusato v'hanoseh kerobat chalusato. We have a braita now. This braita is similar to our Mishnah. It expands on it and adds a lot of actually very important things. So the same three cases we had in our Mishnah: someone who returns his divorcee, or who marries his chalutza, or who marries the relative of his chalutza. In all these cases, Rabbi Akiva Omer, and lo ba kiddushin, kiddushin does not work. Very interesting, even though it's only in Isur Lav. But remember, Rabbi Akiva is very stringent on Isur Lav, and he says that it produces a mamzer. So also, this these stringencies are so much that if you try to do kiddushin, it doesn't even work. And therefore, since even if you give her a ring 100 times, the kiddushin does not take hold. Therefore, no get is required for them to separate. V'hi pesula uvlada pasul. She, by trying, by being together, by being intimate with any of these people she's prohibited to, she becomes prohibited as a zonah to marry a kohen. And should they have a child, a girl, she also will be pasul. To marry, she cannot marry a kohen. All that is Rabbi Akiva. Okay, we know he's stringent, and for sure, he's going to say that the children cannot marry a kohen. And also they can't remain living together, they have to separate. Separate here, that means without a get. You don't need a get, but they cannot be together any longer. Ever. Chachamim omedim. Yesh lo ba kiddushin. Chachamim, however, say the kiddushin works because Chachamim only say regarding an isur karet. That's where the child is a mamzer, and an isur karet, if you try to do kiddushin, it doesn't work. But this is only a isur lav, so the child is not a mamzer, and the kiddushin actually work, and therefore they do have to separate. And sricha menu get, he has to give a get in order to separate. And the kont chachamim hi keshera uvlada kasher. Since it's only isur lav, she can then marry even if she has prohibited relations or prohibited marriage with any of these categories. She can marry a kohen, and she is valid. We'll see what that means. Uvlada kasher, and the child is valid, is kosher, and presumably this means the child can marry a kohen. And there you go. This is a Braita, is the third proof against the law of Rabbi, who says that even according to Chachamim, the child from Machazir Gerushato is Pagum. Here it says Kasher. Okay, so now we're going to, right here we go back to our chart. We had 3 challenges, and now we're going to respond to the third one. This will be able to take a little bit back and forth. We'll respond to the second one. That will be quick, but we will not have a response to the first one, and then we'll go on and give a different version of the law of Rabbi. So we say here, Leman, lav lekehuna. So when it says, Uvlada kasher, the child's kasher, what does that mean? Doesn't it mean for a kohen? And so that's the proof against the kal vachomer. No, it's in lo lakahal. Maybe we can interpret that Vlada kasher means that the child can marry a non-kohen, anyone else in the congregation, but maybe not a kohen. And that would be uphold Rabbi's law. No, ihachi keshera leman Ilema lakahal peshita mishum dezanya apesala lakahal elalav lekehuna. No, it can't be, because let's prove it from the juxtaposed case, you're back to back, right? Law that she is keshera. So what does it mean that she is keshera? If you're going to say that for him it means to any non-kohen, then also for her it means that she can marry any non-kohen. Of course she can. Just because she did a zinut act, that she's going to be prohibited to marry anybody else. That's not a law. Only a mamzer cannot marry anybody else. But a woman who does a prohibited act, although it's prohibited and punishable, whatever it is, she doesn't become prohibited to marry other people for the rest of her life. Rather, for regarding her, it must mean that because she did this zinut act, she is called a zonah, she cannot marry a kohen. So therefore also for him, it means the child cannot marry a kohen, and so this will challenge Rabbi. Hold on. Umidehi lekehuna velada nami lekehuna. So if she is prohibited to marry a kohen, so the child also is prohibited to marry a kohen. Okay, this is part of the support for the B that we just said. But then we say, not necessarily midi iria, hakedi ita, v'hakedi ita. You don't have to assume that both of these 2 clauses have to refer to the same people. Maybe we should interpret each one according to its context. When it says hi keshera, it means she can even marry a kohen, because that mitzvah makes sense, means that she can marry a non-kohen. That's what makes sense for her. There's no way that she is going to be prohibited from marrying a non-kohen. So it means she can marry lakahal, but not to a kohen. But regarding the child, it doesn't have to mean the same thing for her. Regarding the child, we can say the child is permitted to marry a kohen, and anyone, not only kahal, but also a kohen, because why should it affect the child? So you don't have to interpret these to refer to the same people that they can marry. We can say she can marry kahal but not kohen, and the child can marry even a kohen, and that's a perfectly valid interpretation of this baraita. And not only is it possible, hachinami mistabera, it even makes sense. This is a preferable interpretation. Tekatani resha, because look at the resha regarding Rabbi Akiva, where it says hi pesula uvlada pesula. Both the woman and the child are pasul. Now, hi pesula leman. Who is she pasul to? Ilema lakahal mishum dezanya pesala lekahal. Well, you're going to say that she cannot marry anyone, even a non-kohen, just because she did an act of zinut? Does that make her prohibited from marrying anyone in the world? That doesn't make sense. Ela lav lekehuna. So surely Rabbi Akiva meant regarding her that she is prohibited only to a kohen. So in the first half of the statement, he pisula means to a kohen, but permitted to everybody else. Uvelada pasul leman. But the next part that says the child is pasul, to whom? If it's only for a kohen, halakal kasher, are you telling me that according to Rabbi Akiva, the child can marry anyone? Can marry a non-kohen? Hamar Rabbi Akiva valad mamzer. Rabbi Akiva said no. The child becomes a mamzed and therefore cannot marry anyone. Ela peshita lakahal. So therefore, surely that means that he cannot marry anyone. Umidrasha hakadita hakadita sefanami hakadita hakadita. And since the Resha regarding Rabbi Akiva, you interpreted he pisula means only for a kohen. Velada pasul means even for everyone else, and so you don't treat them the same. Therefore, in the Resha, the interpretation we proposed here as being possible is actually the better interpretation, and therefore, this baraita we can interpret according to the B, and it means that the woman is keshera. That's what it says. He keshera. She is permitted to everyone, kohen and non-kohen. And when it says the vela, the child is kasher, that meant is kasher only to a non-kohen, but would be prohibited to a kohen in accordance with the B. And so we can explain that baraita away in accordance with the B. So there's no challenge from the baraita. Regarding the second challenge that we had from the words to'eva he, that only she is a to'eva, the one who returns to her husband after being married to someone else, and we said there that she is a to'eva, but the child is not to'eva, so the child is okay to marry anyone. The child is permitted even to a kohen. That was a challenge to the B, who said no, but that's not a necessary interpretation of this pasuk. Nameh hi to'eva ve'en sarata to'eva aval baneha to'evin. Maybe it says the word vehi, this extra word, is coming to exclude a co-wife. Exclude a co-wife. In other words, if a man was married to two women, one is totally fine. The other one is his divorcee who married someone else and returned to him, and he dies without children. And so this pasuk says she is to'eva. The yavam cannot take the one who was machzir, the woman who came back from the returned divorcee, cannot take her, but the co-wife is okay, is permitted, so we could do yibum with the co-wife. That's what it says, he to'eva, and not someone else. But it's not saying anything about the child. In fact, the child also is to'eva, the child also is prohibited to a kohen, and in this reading it would support Rabbi. Okay, so we dealt with both of those challenges, 2 and 3, but back to the first one. Ela almana kashya mal almana sheken hi asma mitchalelet. The challenge to the kal vachomer from the fact that an almana herself, once she this almana, she could have married any kohen as an almana. Now, if she goes and marries the kohen gadol, she becomes prohibited to any kohen. She herself is mitchalelet. That's a stringency in that case, which does not apply to the returned divorcee, where she was already prohibited to every kohen, and she does not become any more prohibited by returning to her husband. And so that was a challenge to the kal vachomer. That challenge is sustained, and therefore we go back to the drawing board and say, Ela i'itemad hachi itemad. Rather, if the statement was said, it must have been said in the following way. Even though we only rejected the kal vachomer proof for it, but since there's no kal vachomer proof for it, so now we say the entire statement is on unstable ground, so we reread it, and we say, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rabbi Shimon b'Rabbi, same sages, Hakol modim beba al hayave karetot shavalad pagum. Everyone agrees that someone who has illicit relations with someone who to whom they are prohibited with a yisur karet, the child is pagum, cannot marry a kohen. Okay, now we ask, Man hakol modim, who's agreeing to whom? In this case, now because we shifted it to a more severe case, must be Rabbi Yoshua, de'af agav damar Rabbi Yoshua en mamzer mechayave karetot, neida mamzer lahave pagum miyahave. So it must be that Rabbi Yoshua who's agreeing with everyone else, with Chachamim. Right? If remember, there are three different opinions regarding what creates a mamzer. Rabbi Akiva is the most stringent, that says even the isur lav creates a mamzer. The middle opinion are the sages that say isur lav does not, but isur karet does make a mamzer. The most lenient is Rabbi Yoshua, who says only those who are liable to capital punishment in a bet din, though that creates a mamzer. But chayave kiritot does not create a mamzer. And so now we're saying that even Rabbi Yoshua, who says that chayav karet relation does not produce a mamzer, will agree with the sages and everyone else that even though it's not a mamzer, still, if it's a girl, she cannot marry a kohen, right? Everyone else would agree with that also, because of mamzer. So for sure, mamzer can't marry a kohen. So even Rabbi Yoshua agrees in this case. Good. And so that's what the Rabbi is saying, that everyone agrees. And this statement can be supported by a proper kal vachomer, the same one we had before, but this one you cannot refute. Mikal vachomer me'almana. Uma almana lekohen gadol, she'en isura shave bakol, benah pagum, zo isura shave bakol, enodin, shebenah pagum. We have an almana who marries a kohen gadol. It's a prohibition. But that prohibition does not apply to everyone. It applies only to a kohen gadol. It's much more limited and therefore less stringent prohibition. And yet, when they are together, if they produce a child, the child will be prohibited to marry a kohen. So this person, Zosh Isura Shava Bakol, now we're talking about Isur Karet, which applies to everyone. You know, a case of one of the Arayot. And that applies to everyone, and so therefore it's more stringent than Kohen than Almanat Kohen Gadol. All the more so, Benah Pagum, that the child should be a Pagum, and this is something that makes sense, and the Rabbi Yoshua should agree to this. So now we have a good kal vachomer. Now, if you're going to try to refute this kal vachomer the way we did before, let's see if it works. Maybe you'll tell me, oh no, wait, almana, that case is more stringent because she herself becomes prohibited to any kohen. Before, when she was just an almana, she was permitted to marry any kohen, just not kohen gadol. Now that she's with kohen gadol, she herself becomes prohibited to marry a kohen. So maybe that's why, because she herself changes status and becomes more prohibited, maybe that's why in that case the child also is prohibited to marry a kohen. So let's compare that. That has a stringency there. Well, let's compare that to our case. Hachanameh, here regarding any isur karet, pick anyone you want. Kevan shebe'alah you have a woman, any woman, whatever her status was before, and she was totally kosher, right? Totally good. And now the second she has prohibited intercourse with someone to whom she is prohibited with karet, well, that turns her into a zonah. Zonah, for the purposes of marrying kohen, means anyone who has illicit relationship. So here we have the same thing. She was permitted beforehand to marry anyone, even a kohen. And now, because of this, she is now prohibited to be a kohen. So therefore, they actually have the same level of stringency regarding her, and therefore the kal vachomer is sustained. It makes perfect sense that both cases should have the same amount of stringency regarding the child. And if the child is pagum in this case, also it will be pagum in the other case. And now, this new version of the B cannot be challenged by any of the challenges, and the kal vachomer source is sustained. And so now we come back and we have a good statement. So we close off this beautiful chiasm of the first version of the statement, 3 challenges, response, but no response to the third, and now a new version of the statement that we can sustain as the halacha. Baruch Adonai Olam, amen ve'amen.